Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a full day of sports news. Lots of breaking news from yesterday, including Brandon Aiyuk signing a massive 4-year, $120 million deal, making him a top 5 paid receiver in the NFL. We'll break down the whole Brandon Aiyuk saga. It has absolutely been a saga. We'll start with that in just a second, as well as covering all of the biggest stories from last night's college football games and doing a little bit of a preview for all of the biggest games on this weekend's calendar for week 1 of the college football season. Then we'll finish up our fantasy football rankings today, talking about the last of the big 4 positions, the tight ends, giving you a 1 through 24 ranking, and finally ending off our show, as we always do on Friday, with our weekly MLB power rankings, the official Sports by GSMC Podcast Network power rankings. But like I said, we are going to start off our show today talking about Brandon Aiyuk and his contract. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, in this segment, we are going to start off with the story of the offseason, the main character of the NFL offseason, Brandon Aiyuk. We say the saga has ended here at Sports by GSMC Podcast Network, but it absolutely has been a saga. A saga lasting 198 days. Almost 200 days. It started 2 days after the Super Bowl, ending 1 week before the season begins. It's insane how long Brandon Aiyuk has been in conversation to be traded, how long his name and this specific story has been in the spotlight for the NFL offseason. It is finally done. The 49ers ink Brandon Aiyuk to a 4-year, $120 million contract, something that he absolutely does deserve the money. He gets paid like a top 5 receiver. Whether or not he's a top 5 receiver in the game is up for debate. I personally don't think he is, but he didn't reset the market. He took generally what I guess could be considered to be a discount in the wide receiver market, not resetting it, but he gets paid a lot of money. The 49ers now focus all their attention on Trent Williams, who, like I said yesterday, I think is the biggest factor in this football team. You could take any other player, any other piece out of that 49ers unit, but losing Trent Williams is the biggest X factor for them, not just on the field, but off of it as well. So let's do a little bit of a timeline here for you. We start at the top. 2 days after the Super Bowl, Brandon Aiyuk's girlfriend puts out a message on social media basically saying he has an issue with his contract. He wants to get paid more. He's only making $14 million on his 5th-year option. He would like to be paid around that $20-25 million mark that the top receivers are getting paid. And that is a lower number than what he got. So looking at that, obviously the big takeaway is the wide receiver market has expanded massively. That's been one of the biggest takeaways from this offseason. The wide receiver market went from 25-ish, 20 million, all the way up to 30, 35 million. That's a $10 million per year increase for these top guys. That's why you pay your guys early. If the 49ers had paid him then, they would have saved $15 million a year. I'm sure he was asking for 20, Deebo Samuel money. But now he's asking for Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson kind of money. He got his money. That's the first step in this story. 2 days after the Super Bowl. A month later, March 25th, GM John Lynch comes out in a press conference. This has been a story that's been circulating for a while. He says, Brandon Aiyuk is a guy that we want amidst trade rumors. He's a guy that we want to keep here for a long time. And that lasts just about a couple weeks, because then it comes out sometime in the month of April before the draft that they're listening to trade offers for Brandon Aiyuk. Teams are offering, reportedly, a first-round pick for Brandon Aiyuk. Maybe Deebo Samuel as well. Nobody gets traded. The draft comes around. In the end of the first round, the San Francisco 49ers pick rookie wide receiver Ricky Pearsall. The rumors just continue to pile up again. Oh, why did they pick Pearsall? Are they thinking that they're not going to have Brandon Aiyuk? Are they going to trade Brandon Aiyuk now? The story reignites its flames, and it stays around there with little bits of adding tension to it until the big one drops on June 17th. A couple of months, just about a month or two after the draft, Brandon Aiyuk posts a TikTok video himself on a FaceTime with rookie Commanders quarterback Jaden Daniels, his former college quarterback when they were both playing at the university at Arizona State University. Post a TikTok video where he says, "They don't want me back," referring to they as the 49ers. Ignites a lot of rumors. Hey, is he going to the Commanders? Then there's that whole situation where he gets Commanders tape in early July, watches Commanders film. There's lots of momentum to him going to the Commanders. The Commanders don't have the draft capital or the money where they're willing to pay for Brandon Aiyuk. So that one fizzles out. After a month of will they, won't they, another big thing comes through. A formal trade request, this time from Brandon Aiyuk. This one really felt like nothing at that point of it. It's one of those things where we take a look and we're like, oh, he's basically been on the trade block this whole time. But a formal trade request from Brandon Aiyuk himself feels like, hey, ties are severed. It makes it a lot harder to come back. Then, a week later, his hold-in officially begins. He's officially requested a trade. He's shown up to training camp, and he is not practicing. He's sitting in there trying to get that contract done, not participating with the team. There's all these reports of him talking with the GM, him being friendly with the GM, nothing happening, up and down. And then 10 days later, just about on August 5th, news breaks that the 49ers have trade packages set up with two teams, the Browns and the Patriots. They have trade packages set up with both of them. They're ready. They just need Brandon Aiyuk to pick a team, sign a contract with them. It seems like the Patriots have the most momentum. They've offered him, Brandon Aiyuk, the most amount of money. Brandon Aiyuk says no to the Patriots, or the Patriots drop out. We don't know exactly what happens. My best guess is he said no to the Patriots. Throughout the rest of August, all the way through about August 10th, we have the Browns and the Steelers who join in once the Patriots are done. Now, Brandon Aiyuk gave an interview on a podcast earlier in the summer. He said his two teams that he would like to play for were the Commanders with Jaden Daniels and the Steelers with Mike Tomlin. Those two teams were kind of out of the mix. They weren't willing to pay the price either for Aiyuk or for the 49ers. They were kind of out there. But Brandon Aiyuk, as of the early August, rejects both the Browns and the Steelers' offer. But the 49ers have made an offer to him. We don't know what the offer is. The offer stands. This holdout continues. It seems like they're not getting any closer together. Reporting on this continues. Like I said, we talked about this before yesterday. We talked about how it seemed like they were preparing to play week one without Brandon Aiyuk. In fact, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan came out a couple days ago and said, we're preparing to play week one without Brandon Aiyuk and Trent Williams. But at the last hour, last night around 8 p.m.-ish, 7-ish, Brandon Aiyuk officially signs a contract with the San Francisco 49ers, a 4-year, $120 million deal, front-loaded deal, which is good for the 49ers. This reportedly is the same deal that was offered to him on August 10th, when the 49ers first really started to revamp their efforts to keep Brandon Aiyuk in the building, keep him from walking away in a trade. Why it took so long for this to happen, I don't know. There have been people that have been blaming the 49ers, saying, if you had done this back in February and extended him, you would have only had to pay him $25 million instead of $30, which maybe you're right. But this move feels more like it's on the timeline of Brandon Aiyuk. Brandon Aiyuk is the way that the Brandon Aiyuk camp handled this situation kind of feels like master negotiations, right? They saw how big of a wide receiver market explosion was about to happen. And anyone could see it if you looked at it. There were 12, 13 wide receivers that got huge extensions this year. They were just all up at the same time. Everybody saw it coming. I saw it coming. A lot of analysts saw it coming, and the Brandon Aiyuk camp saw it coming. And I think they handled this incredibly. Now, it is annoying how often they were in the news, but that's how you get a negotiation done. That's how you get your guy to go from someone that would make $20 million to a guy that's making 30. I give a lot of credit to the agents, to their camp, to whatever strategist came up with this plan to keep him in the news cycle. Now, it only works because he's coming off of a 1,300-yard season, a very, very, very good performance in the playoffs, and everything else that he did, and that worked to his favor as well. But I think the reason this took so long was because Brandon Aiyuk was intentionally holding out a little bit longer, trying to get the best deal as possible. He's had about 3 or 4 options on the table at one point, and he chose the best one. The 49ers give him the best chance at winning. It's a system that he knows works for him. It's a team that already works for him. It's the best team that is going to give him a deal. So I think this was a masterclass in negotiation for Brandon Aiyuk and his team. Good job for them. The 49ers do need Brandon Aiyuk. He's a very good receiver, but I'm very impressed with how the negotiations went. But let me know what you think of the Brandon Aiyuk saga. If it went on too long, which, yeah, it objectively went on too long. 198 days to get a contract and to stay in the news cycle is objectively way too long. The entire offseason is way too long. But good on him for getting a deal done. Let me know what you think. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about college football. We're going to go over all of the games from yesterday, including Colorado sneaking out with a tight win against a very good North Dakota State team, as well as North Carolina escaping with a tight defensive win over Minnesota, as well as every other major game that's coming up this weekend in the world of college football. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Please, Lord, give me a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Please, Lord, give me a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. Look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day. I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I don't even shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, getting my way into be put down. Hitting your place. I'll prove my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it. The losing fit. The losing shit. The stupid myth. You choose to live. I choose to dip. You choose to fight. The losing grip and losing gift. Stop. Like I'm losing my mind. Please, Lord, give me a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. It's everybody in the world. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just gone over the entirety of the Brandon Aiyuk saga, one that lasted 198 days. A shame we couldn't make it to the big 200, but a very long, drawn-out process that ends in Brandon Aiyuk getting a 4-year, $120 million contract. In this segment here, we're going to move over to the sport of college football, talk about all the biggest games from yesterday, as well as previewing a bunch of the biggest games in the slate for week 1 as the weekend approaches. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some college football today. College football, the big headline from yesterday is the Colorado versus North Dakota State game. And the big headline from there is Travis Hunter. If you were not watching and you don't know anything about college football, you should know the name Travis Hunter. He is going to be a problem at the next level. He's going to be a problem all year long. Travis Hunter is a very special prospect. Not only is he a top-tier wide receiver, 7 catches, 132 yards, and 3 touchdowns, one of which coming on one of the greatest catches I've ever seen, a heavily contested fade ball that's underthrown. That was one of the problems for Shedeur Sanders last night, although he also had a very good game. A great adjustment, body control on the ball for Travis Hunter. Scores his 3rd touchdown of the game. Not only is he an elite receiver in the college football world, but he also plays corner at the same time, coming out and playing almost every single snap of the entire football game. He is something special. His motor is insane. His agility, speed, and ball skills are something of a marvel. He's just a special football player. Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback for Colorado, finishes with 445 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, and a fluke interception, one that bounces off the calf of a defender that is lying on the ground. And another receiver had a huge game. Jimmy Horn Jr., 7 catches, 198 yards, and a touchdown. For Colorado, it's not all good. They did end up winning the game 31-26, a very tightly contested game. They only had 2 yards per carry on the ground. And you're going up against a defensive unit in North Dakota State that was built to stop the run. They also were running all over you defensively, and it wasn't just on the ground. Defensively for Colorado, it was awful. North Dakota State could get just about anything they wanted to. They were eating up clock, especially in that first half, entering halftime with a lead, stuffing them on 4th and 1 a couple of times in their own zone. There were just a bunch of mistakes. The offensive line for Colorado, even though it was supposed to be revamped, was supposed to be a strength of this new team, ended up really hurting them in the end. Shedeur Sanders made a lot of really impressive throws with pressure in his face. That's not a situation that you want to be. This is an FCS school. For as good as the Bison are, it's an FCS program. If they go and they do this against Utah, they are going to get killed. They are not going to stand a chance. If they have an offense that's as high-powered as Colorado's, with any remote kind of skill defensively, those teams are going to kill them. I'm a little worried about Colorado. They were supposed to take a big step. Ultimately, they did not. The only other close game that took place last night was between UNC and Minnesota. This game was basically the opposite of the Colorado-North Dakota State game. This one was a field goal fest, a defensive, hard-nosed game. On the ground, like I said in the preview for yesterday, Omarion Hampton went off 30 carries for 129 yards. This game came down to the wire. They were trading field goals down the stretch. Minnesota lined up for a 47-yard kick to end the game. Unfortunately, it sails wide right, and UNC escapes with its first true road victory since 1985. Mac Brown improves to 5-1 in opening games. They do lose a quarterback, though. Quarterback goes to the hospital with a leg injury, had to get taken off of the field. Hopefully he's okay. They were running a 2-quarterback system, so they were able to survive it. For Minnesota, their run defense, not very good. Still, they were able to get a lot of stops defensively, and it was a kind of a sloppy game. The offense needs to get going a little bit more. We saw transfer quarterback from New Hampshire only throw for 166 yards when last year he was averaging over 300 a game. They need to get some offense going. The defense is a good sign for both of these teams. They both have new defensive coordinators, and they both showed out in their first game. Now, it might be against weaker offenses, both offenses that either lost a lot of talent, or were getting a lot of new guys in. So it's not the greatest test, but a 19-17 victory for North Carolina and a big one against a Power 4 opponent. Those were the two biggest games that took place yesterday. But there are about there are a bunch of games that I want to go over today for the weekend. Three of them between two ranked opponents should be a lot of fun. The starting one, the opening one, we get to see number one seed, number one overall in the AP preseason poll, Georgia take on Clemson. Clemson keeps scheduling these tough games to begin their schedule. It's an interesting strategy if they can play close against Georgia, who by far I think is the best team in college football. Maybe the only other team I think, looking at it roster wise, that can stand up to them toe for toe, I think might be Ohio State. Now, a lot of things can change down the stretch. This is not going to be good for Clemson's playoff chances. Now, in a new 12-team playoff league, if they can keep it close against Georgia, the spread for this game is sitting at 11.5 towards Georgia. If they can cover that spread, keep it to single-digit game, or at least a respectable game against a really, really good Georgia team, it could go a long way for their playoff resume. Georgia, again, is the number one team for a reason. They're returning 7 defensive starters, quarterback Carson Beck on a defense that always was one of the best in the countries. But don't sleep on the Clemson defense either. Clemson got hot down the stretch. They started off a little bit slow. Quarterback Cade Klubnik comes back. He's been a lot better, especially down the stretch. Their defense, that was ranked 7th best in the nation last year, returns a whole bunch of starters. The one thing is that they lost the entirety of their defensive line. They have some nice recruits coming in to replace that, but if they don't make use of the transfer portal, and I think that's going to be the downfall of this Clemson team. That's been Dabo Swinney's thing. He's been unable to adapt to the transfer portal. We'll see if this new defensive line can do anything against a very, very stacked Georgia team. I personally don't think so. I think I have a little score prediction for all of these games. This one, I have Georgia winning. Basically a home game, although technically it's neutral field. They're playing in Atlanta, so might be even more of a home game than when they play in Athens. But I have them winning 38-21. The next game that I wanted to highlight on Saturday is Penn State going down to Morgantown, West Virginia, taking on the West Virginia Mountaineers. This, I think, is going to be a very good game. The spread currently sits, Penn State is favored by 7.5 points. Penn State's defense, as always, should be really good in this game. They're going to have a new defensive coordinator, a new offensive coordinator. It's basically a brand new coaching staff outside of James Franklin for Penn State. That defense should be really good. The one question is, can Drew Aller improve? The quarterback on Penn State last year is back once again. He struggled last season. The defense for Penn State kept them in the game, kept them up there. They were a very Iowa-esque team last year. A lot kind of like Ohio State was last year, with a really, really good defense, but a quarterback that just could not get it done. And if Drew Aller can't take that next step, Penn State is going to be in trouble against a West Virginia team that is hungry, really took a big step last season with quarterback Garrett Green. He returns. He's up on the field. They struggled against Penn State last time, but this is not going to be a cakewalk of a matchup. West Virginia is going to be very good. They can fight for a playoff spot, maybe even a conference title in the Big 12, although that will be tough this season. I'm leaning towards Penn State victory, although I do think West Virginia will cover the spread. I have this game finalizing at 27-23. Then we have another fun FCS Power 4 school matchup. This time between South Dakota State University taking on number 17 Oklahoma State. And this one should be a lot of fun. South Dakota State is the next up in the FCS. We talked a lot about North Dakota State yesterday, how they were a dynasty, won 9 of the last 12. Well, South Dakota State is currently the number 1 ranked FCS school. They've won 29 straight games. They've won back-to-back national titles in the FCS. This is not a team that you can just look over. This is a really good FCS team. Mike Gundy is 15-0 versus the FCS, but He often plays them close. He often gives them scares. And if you let South Dakota State stay in the game, they are a team that absolutely will take advantage of that. Their turnover margin is one of the best in the country at plus 16. They start fast. They outscore teams by almost 100 points in the first quarter. They haven't given up over 21 points in any game. I do expect that one to end. I think Oklahoma State, with their offense powered by Heisman contender Ollie Gordon, running back, going to be one of the top picks in the draft. Definitely a Heisman contender in Ollie Gordon the second. But don't sleep on South Dakota State. Their quarterback, Mark Goronski, has gotten some NFL hype. He just won the Walter Payton Award last year for the best player in the FCS. This is going to be a very good game. Right now, Oklahoma State is favored by 10 points. I am leaning towards Oklahoma State pulling out a tight victory, but I definitely think South Dakota State covers the spread. I have the final score 30-24 Oklahoma State. There's a couple more games that I wanted to highlight before we moved on to fantasy football, including Miami of Ohio taking on Northwestern. And you might look at me and say, hey, we've been going all over all of these other games. Why is that one next on the list? Miami of Ohio is a dark horse group of 5 contender to get that last spot. You talk about a lot of teams that are up there, your Boise States, your App States, your JMUs, your Tulanes. Miami of Ohio is a team that should absolutely be in that conversation. They went 11-3 last year in the MAC. 11-3 last year in the MAC, going up against a good Northwestern team, led by reigning Big Ten Coach of the Year, David Braun. They went 8-5 last year. This is a team, both of these are on their up and up. Right now, Northwestern is favored by 3.5. I want to talk about this game because I think Miami of Ohio pulls off the upset here. Right now, Northwestern is favored by 3.5, but I think Miami of Ohio comes into Northwestern and wins this game, 21-20. And one more upset that I want to talk about before we get into arguably the 3 biggest games of the slate this weekend. Richmond taking on the University of Virginia. Richmond is another FCS school that shouldn't be taken lightly. Richmond just is coming off a second-round performance in the FCS, returning a whole bunch of starters, as well as a bunch of defensive starters. They were the 5th-ranked defense in all of the FCS, going up against a UVA team that, while definitely improved, I do like their quarterback as a true sophomore, is a really bad defensive unit. This is a team that should be on upset watch. The spread is UVA favored by 19 points. I love Richmond plus 19. That might be one of my favorite bets this entire college football slate, but I think Richmond might even be able to pull off an upset. I have them winning this game 36-35, shades of the JMU UVA game that took place last year, where we got to see a UVA team just get outmatched. And UVA is not a very good team, but I think Richmond can take care of business. Now on to the big 3 of this weekend. Starting off in the Swamp, University of Miami, the U, goes down to the Swamp for the first time since 2008 to take on state rival, the University of Florida. And this kicks off Florida's brutal schedule. Florida probably has the most difficult schedule in the entirety of college football. And this is a hot seat year for Billy Napier. He needs to show up and he needs to show out. And this would go a long way against number 19 Miami. Miami is relying a lot on the transfer portal. Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, running back, quarterback duo come in from the transfer portal. They should be really good. Again, we saw what the transfer portal can do, so I'm a little more cautious after the Florida State team looked just kind of discombobulated out in Europe. But Miami's a very, very good team. Again, like I said, this is the first time in the Swamp since 2008. The last time that they won in the Swamp was 2002. There's not too much to point to for Florida, right? They're a team that brought in a couple of transfers, had a solid recruiting class that kind of got taken away in the second window. I'm a little worried about them. And as much as we talk this matchup up, as people are saying, oh, it might be close, the spread is 2.5 in favor of Miami. I don't think this game will end up being that close. Miami's 8-1 in the month of August in their last 9 games. I don't see that changing right now. I think their transfers will work out, and I really am a big fan of this Miami team. I have Miami winning 31-17 in the Swamp, although that will be a very fun game to watch. Up next, we have 2 top 25 matchups. Number 7, Notre Dame taking on number 20, Texas A&M. And this is going to be a defensive battle, I think. I know Notre Dame brings in former Duke standout quarterback Riley Leonard. They have a new offensive coordinator coming in from LSU. This is a very, very good defense on both sides. Obviously, Notre Dame's defense usually is one of the better ones in the country, but don't sleep on Texas A&M. Their defensive line is going to be great, and an offensive line on Notre Dame that generally is solid. Lost 2 starters to the draft, lost 1 starter to injury for the season, now has to start a freshman on the edge. That's going to be the big battle. How will the Notre Dame offensive line hold up against a really good Texas A&M defensive line? That's where it's going to come down to. And I think that Texas A&M defensive line is just going to be enough to pull ahead. I do think this is going to be a slugfest, a defensive battle. Texas A&M is favored by 3 points. I think they win this game 17-16. And the final game that I wanted to cover is another top 25 battle between number 23 USC and number 13 LSU. This is a battle between schools that just produced the number 1 and number 2 overall picks in Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, Heisman winner, both Heisman winners. They both go 1 and 2. Now we have new quarterbacks on both sides. Both of these quarterbacks performed very well in their bowl games last season, with Garrett Nussmeier going 31 for 45, 395 yards, and 3 touchdowns in his bowl game for LSU, while Miller Moss went 23 for 33, 372 yards, and 6 touchdowns in their bowl game for USC. Both of them have very solid offenses. I think they're going to struggle a little bit. The defense for LSU definitely has the advantage. Both offenses should go. I do think it might be a little sloppy, though. And because the defensive advantage is there for LSU, I'm going to give this game to them. Right now, they're favored by 4 points. I have a final score of 31-27, LSU taking it with a push on the cover. Let me know on the spread. Let me know what you think of any of these games. Any other games that I didn't cover that you want me to take a look at, go ahead and throw that in the comments real quick. I'll try and get to them before the show ends. But we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to take a look at tight ends in fantasy, the final of our Big 4 fantasy group. We're going to take a look at where I have them ranked 1 through 24. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just went over a bunch of games for college football this weekend, as well as some of the results from last night. In this segment, we're going to talk all about fantasy football tight ends, the last of our big four group. We went over wide receivers, running backs, quarterbacks earlier on this week. You can go check them out on the channel if you would like to see where I had those ranked. But in this segment, we're going to get into our tight end rankings. Before we do, though, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you are on YouTube, you can use the super chat feature. It should have a message pop up as well. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into our fantasy football tight end rankings. Obviously, the tight end position is an interesting one. There's lots of different strategies of if you should draft at the top, if you should wait for some of those middle sections. I'm personally a guy that doesn't like to put too much draft capital into a tight end, but if you're looking to get an elite tight end, there are a couple of options out there. This is the deepest the tight end group, in my opinion, has really ever been. At least in the last 15 years, we haven't had this many tight ends that can consistently produce fantasy points. So I'm very excited for tight ends this year. You can get some great value ones, especially down the board. But if you want to get some of these top guys like Travis Kelce, like Sam Laporta, 1A, 1B guys, you're going to need to spend probably a third round, second round even pick on some of these guys, which could be worth it. So at the top, we have Travis Kelce. And I did have a little bit of a discussion trying to figure out if Sam Laporta should be ranked ahead of Travis Kelce, but you can't dethrone the greatest fantasy tight end of all time in Travis Kelce when he has Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. I'm giving the edge to him, especially after what we saw him do in the playoffs last year. At number 2, Sam Laporta, just a touchdown scoring machine, right? He's a guy that could go number 1, was the number 1 tight end in fantasy last year. There's no reason why he can't be this year. Both of those guys are at the top of the hill if we're doing tiers for tight ends. At number 3, Mark Andrews. As long as he stays healthy, he has a chance to be up in that top tier. But he's been injured. He's got a lot more mouths to feed in that offense now. We're going to keep him at number 3. And I think those are very clearly the top 3 guys. Once you get below Mark Andrews, it gets a little more jumbled up from around 4 to, from around 4 to 9, I'd say, is the next tier of guys. Dalton Kincaid, coming off of a really good rookie season, should get even more of a workload. Dawson Knox is starting to fade further into the background in that Bills offense, especially with the amount of wide receivers that have left in the Bills offseason, leaving them with rookie wide receivers, some journeyman guys, and some young guys that are unproven. Dalton Kincaid should get an upswing in targets, this season. That's why he's at number 4 for me. At number 5, I've got Evan Ingram, and I was debating switching him and George Kittle at the 5 and 6 spot, but I'm going with Evan Ingram because George Kittle is a little more inconsistent. And I know that might sound crazy because Evan Ingram's a guy that, you don't think of as consistency, but he will get you 10 points a game, which if you can get 10 points a game out of your tight end position, set it and forget it guy, that is everything you're looking for in a tight end. And Evan Ingram, I think, is really, really good at that. At 6, George Kittle, he's a guy that's going to finish probably in the tight end 5, above tight end 6 as far as total points. But he's a guy that's going to give you stinkers in weeks. And if you draft him, you're just going to have to put up with that because he's also going to give you a couple of 30-point games. But there's also going to be a couple of those 2-point games in there. So you got to live with what he gives you. So I put him at number 6. He's a guy that, for me personally, I'm just not drafting because he's too volatile, although he is a weak winner when he does go off. At number 7, I have Trey McBride, and I know that's a little bit lower than a lot of people have him, but Trey McBride, for all of the targets he was getting down the stretch of the season with Kyler Murray, he was probably that wide receiver 1. Now they have Marvin Harrison, and Kyler Murray loves throwing to a great wide receiver. He loves when he had DeAndre Hopkins was the guy. Now he has Marvin Harrison Jr. He's going to be the guy. I expect Trey McBride to still get a good amount of targets, but it's going to be a little bit down from where it was this year. At 8, we have Kyle Pitts. And this year, I'm a Kyle Pitts believer. Shame on me. Fool me once, fool me twice, whatever. I'm a Kyle Pitts believer this year. He gets Kirk Cousins at quarterback. A huge improvement from anyone else that he's had in his entire career. Even with those guys, he's been able to put up a 1,000-yard season. He sneakily has been putting up good numbers. Even last year, which was a disappointment, he put up good numbers. Kyle Pitts is a tight end I absolutely believe in, and I think you could get him for good value because he's scorned so many people in the past, and maybe I'm the next one to do it, but I'm a Kyle Pitts believer this year. He slots in at a tight end 8 for me. At tight end 9, Jake Ferguson, and he's slid a little more under the radar than I would have thought. Jake Ferguson is a guy that the tight ends the Cowboys have always go off. The Cowboys love their tight ends. Every single time, they love throwing to their tight ends. Dalton Schultz was there. He was really good. Caught about a touchdown a game with Dak Prescott. Obviously, Jason Witten before him. Jake Ferguson is that next guy in line. If you want to share of that, Cowboys offense, and you're not picking at 1, 2, or 3, wherever you can get CeeDee Lamb at, Jake Ferguson is going to be that second weapon for the Cowboys. A great red zone threat. Dak loves throwing to him. He's going to be really good. He's my tight end 9. And at number 10, I have David Njoku. This is when we start to get to that next tier, like I was saying. This next tier is guys that could explode, could make it up to that top 10. This goes somewhere from where I have tight end 10 all the way to 13. So these 4 guys are guys that I believe in. I just don't believe in. I think they're solid options, but I don't think they're guys that will be guaranteed to have good seasons. At 10, David Njoku. And the question here isn't on his skill. His skill is awesome. He's very good, very athletic, very fast. So fast he even gets rushing attempts, which is kind of crazy for tight ends. But David Njoku hasn't had that big explosion with Deshaun Watson. He really went off with Joe Flacco last season. That's something that he doesn't have this year. It's something that he needs to prove to me, although looking at his numbers, he gets a bunch of targets when playing with Deshaun Watson as well. He sits here at number 10 for me because I'm just not sure which version of David Njoku we're going to get. At 11, Dallas Goedert. He sits all the way down here at 11 because he plays third, fourth fiddle in that offense. He's going to be behind A.J. Brown. He's going to be behind Devonta Smith. He's going to be behind Saquon Barkley. That's 4 guys that are going to get fed before Dallas Goedert gets fed. And that's not to say that he's bad, but he's just going to be in a tier below that second tier because he's going to be that 4th option in the offense rather than a second option like a Jake Ferguson. And rounding out the top 12 here, we have Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz is a guy that I'm higher on than a lot of other people. I think what he's able to do with the Texans, we've seen interviews from CJ Stroud talking about plays that he's improvised. A lot of those have Dalton Schultz in them. They're going to have a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, but there's always going to be a tight end on the field, a safety valve for CJ Stroud. And I don't think there's anything wrong with waiting a long time, getting a very good value with Dalton Schultz. That's what I've done in a couple of my drafts, not getting a tight end until the double-digit rounds, grabbing Dalton Schultz around 8, 9, 10, 11. You can get him late. He's going late. He's a guy I absolutely love this season. He's a guy like Dallas Goedert that's going to play third, fourth fiddle in that offense. But he's a guy that can get you value. Dallas Goedert and Dalton Schultz are kind of in a very similar situation for me. They're going to be good value to get a piece of the offense that is going to be really good. But that's the top 12. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to go over the next 12. This is where it gets a little crazy because as deep as the tight end position goes, it really only goes about 13, 14, maybe 15 deep. and then it gets a little crazy. You can kind of look ahead a little bit and see what I'm talking about. I will come up with explanations for you just so you have them for why I have a list the way I do. Stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the first half of the fantasy tight end rankings for you. We've gone over quarterbacks, we've gone over wide receivers, we've gone over running backs in other days this week. We're finishing up our tight end rankings, finishing up our fantasy football ratings, so you're prepared for your draft this weekend and next week. Like I said, we're going to finish up our tight end rankings in this segment, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I'll get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we're going to finish up our tight end rankings here today. We've gone through 1 through 12. And as I said when we were introducing number 10, 11, and 12, we're going to finish out that tier that I believe in. The tier that I think really separates a tight end that I would start from guys that I'm trying to avoid a little bit. And 13, in my personal opinion, is the furthest back I would take a tight end. And that is Brock Bowers. The reason I have Brock Bowers so low is because I don't know what he's going to be in that offense. This is a weird Raiders situation, right? This is a Raiders situation where they draft Michael Mayer last year. Brock Bowers falls to them. You kind of have to take him. He's one of the best on the board at this point. Brock Bowers is a guy that is supremely talented, can come in as a wide receiver. They can run a lot of two tight end sets. But we also have Gardner Minshew at quarterback, a guy that 30% of the time throws to wide receiver one. That leaves only 70% of all the other balls he throws going to the rest of the lineup. Now, Brock Bowers should get a large percentage of that, but I don't know what his role in the offense is going to look like. I don't know how often he's going to be out there. If it's going to be a 75% snap share, a 50-50 snap share with Michael Mayer. The Raiders say they believe in them, but Brock Bowers is a guy that even with all of those questions, I'm willing to take a flyer on because I believe in his skill. And I believe as the season goes on, they're not going to be able to ignore him and keep him off the field. Brock Bowers is my number 13 tight end. And now we get to the point where I start to question if I can start these guys. 14 on. Again, the tight end position is deeper than I ever thought it would be. Usually it only went 5 deep. After that, you're in the quicksand. Now you go 13 deep, and now I'm in the quicksand. At 14, I have Cole Kmet. And Cole Kmet is a guy that usually would be up in the tier that I trust, but they had Gerald Everett out there. They bring him in. He looked really good in the preseason, had a lot of connection with Caleb Williams while the ones were out there. I think he might bite into a little bit of Cole Kmet's work. We'll see what happens, but that's why Cole Kmet falls. At 15, Pat Freiermuth, another one of those guys that, in theory, should be up there. But he plays for the Steelers, and I cannot trust an Arthur Smith tight end. We've been burned by Kyle Pitts a million times when he's with Arthur Smith. I don't know what they're going to do now that he's in in Steelerland up in Pittsburgh. Pat Fryermuth should be a really good safety valve for Russell Wilson, for Justin Fields, but I don't know how they're going to use him. At 16, TJ Hawkinson. He should be all the way up there. I should trust TJ Hawkinson, but he's coming off an ACL injury. We don't know when he'll be back. Latest reports are he should be back before the first half of the season is over. So somewhere around October. That's a lot of production to miss for your tight end. If you're going to draft him later on, I definitely don't mind that. But TJ Hawkinson is a guy that you have to know starts on the PUP list. The earliest he can come in is week 6. He's going to come back in October at the earliest. Don't expect too much out of him. That's why he's down at 16. At 17 is Taysom Hill. And there's going to be about 1 million reactions to Taysom Hill being at 17. Why is he so high? Why is he so low? He's an enigma of a football player, right? He's going to score a bunch of touchdowns in a bunch of different ways. He's going to run in a couple touchdowns. He's going to throw some touchdowns. He's going to catch some touchdowns. He's a guy that I want stashed at the end of my bench for a week where maybe he starts at quarterback. And, you might be thinking, hey, that's a little cheap, but he's listed as tight end. He barely plays quarterback, but he can still throw the football. He can still start a game if the Saints really want him to do that. He's a Swiss Army knife, and I think he's a really nice guy to fill in and stream matchup-wise, just because he can do so much. He can beat you on the ground, beat you through the air, beat you with his arm. He's so tough to plan against. At 18, I have Mike Gesicki, and this is a guy that you guys might look at me crazy for putting this high up on the list, but Mike Gesicki is someone I think is going to surprise a lot of people. Mike Gesicki joins the Bengals. He's the tight end 1 there ahead of Drew Sample. He's a guy that can replace Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd, the slot receiver. Joe Burrow has thrown 65 targets on average to tight ends in his 2 healthy seasons. That's 65 targets. Say he catches, 50 of them. It's pretty good for a tight end. Also, he's gonna eat into a little bit of that slot receiver role. We've seen what he did when he was the Dolphins' number 1. He's got the athleticism, the speed to go and produce kind of like a wide receiver. He should get a lot of targets in a high-powered Bengals offense. He's a guy that, again, he's very boom or bust. This is me taking a flyer on him because I like the upside on Mike Gesicki, but also you're taking him over guys that does it really matter if you're starting number 1 overall tight end is going to be Hunter Henry. Are you really saying you feel that much more comfortable with Hunter Henry than Mike Gesicki? And really for me, that's a minimal difference. I like Mike Gesicki's upside. He's there at 18 for me. At 19 is Tyler Conklin. He's there because it's a good Jets offense with a good Jets quarterback. I like Aaron Rodgers this season a lot. I think Tyler Conklin, when he's not throwing to Garrett Wilson, Tyler Conklin is a guy that could get a lot of targets on the underside. Aaron Rodgers likes his tight ends a little bit, and the Tyler Conklin is that tight end for the Jets. He should get a good amount of targets here in the Jets system. He's my tight end at 19. At 20, Hunter Henry. When in doubt, if you're really in doubt, go to a rookie quarterback's tight end. That is a pretty tried and true method to get a solid tight end. They love their little dump offs when they're under pressure. Hunter Henry is a big jump ball receiver. He should be very helpful for when Drake May gets into the game for the Patriots. At 21, Cade Otton. Cade Otton's very, very solid. He's a really good tight end, but as far as receiving, he doesn't have that great upside. He might catch a touchdown every once in a while, but he's not going to go off for 20 points in a game. That's just not something in his repertoire. He's someone that can do that, but it's not something that he's really going to go out and show that he is the guy. He is the one that is going to be this great tight end. I like Cade Otton a lot, but he's not a starting tight end for fantasy for me. He's number 21. At 22 is Noah Fant. Noah Fant is another one of these guys, kind of like Mike Gesicki, that just doesn't get enough targets. He's got the athleticism to be a wide receiver-esque tight end, but he just doesn't get the amount of targets that he needs to be that guy. At 23 is Isaiah Likely. And Isaiah Likely, again, much like Noah Fant, a guy that when he gets his chances are really good. but he also has to contend with Mark Andrews as that tight end. Maybe he gets more chances on the field this year after what he did last year. Isaiah Likely's a really, really good tight end, but he's the tight end 2 in Baltimore, and he barely slides onto this list. And finally, a rookie that I really like before we get to our honorable mentions, Ben Sinnott. He's not going to start the season hot, but he's a guy in Washington. Again, when in doubt, rookie quarterbacks tight end. You can talk about Zach Ertz. He's one of my honorable mentions that's going to start, but I like Ben Sinnott a little more than him. He should kind of get on later in the season, kind of like Trey McBride did when he overtook Zach Ertz last season. Honorable mentions, I have the Green Bay tight ends. I don't have them on here because I don't know who is going to start. They're listed as co-starters. I don't know which one to trust. Both Luke Musgrave and Tyler Kroft, either one of them, whichever one turns out to be the fantasy one, should be on this list. I just don't know which one it is, so I put them in my honorable mentions. I talked a little bit about Gerald Everett. I like him a little bit. He's not going to catch 8 balls a game, but he looked good in the preseason with Caleb Williams, got a good amount of targets. He's in my honorable mentions. Zach Ertz, again, should be good for the beginning of the season. Greg Dulcich, if you really want to take a flyer on a really high upside guy, that's him. He gets hurt too often for me to trust. And the last honorable mention I have, Daniel Bellinger. Daniel Bellinger for the Giants is a guy in his rookie season when Daniel Jones was healthy that caught a lot of touchdowns. The Giants like to throw it to the tight end in the red zone. He's going to be touchdown dependent. But without Saquon Barkley, he could be their go-to guy in the red zone, a touchdown eater from Malik Neighbors. Not really worth rostering, but a name to keep an eye on if the Giants offense gets any kind of momentum. Those are my thoughts on tight ends. If you have anyone that you think I missed, anything I had ranked way too high, way too low, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take our 4th and final break here. When we come back, we're going to finish off the week like we always do with our official Sports by GSMC Podcast Network MLB Power Rankings. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over our fantasy football tight end rankings. In this segment, we're going to close out our show talking all about the MLB with our weekly MLB power rankings. We'll go over which teams have risen, which teams have fallen, why they have done that in just a second. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use the super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish out our show today with the MLB Power Rankings. There they are right there for you, 1 through 30. And as always, we're going to start at the bottom. At number 30, the Chicago White Sox. The White Sox are on the longest losing streak in baseball. Who would have guessed it? The Chicago White Sox are awful. They are going to be the worst team in the history of baseball when we finally get to the end of it. The Chicago White Sox are going to break that 120 game record. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when at this point. And I am here excited for the rest of the ride to see how many games they are able to lose before the season ends. At 29, we have the Miami Marlins. The Miami Marlins are bad. I don't think I need to explain much more than that. They just lost a series to the Rockies. Because of that, they stay below them. The Rockies at 28. At 27, the Angels stay below the Athletics. Those have been the bottom 5 the whole time. That's not going to change, although we do have a little bit of a shakeup in that next tier of bad. The Pirates down 3 spots from 22 to 25. They have just been in a free fall since the All-Star break, which is a shame. They almost made the playoffs in the first year of Paul Skeens, but they have Paul Skeens. They have some future to look forward to. Up next is the Reds. The Reds are only above the Pirates because they just beat them in a series. The Reds are also falling quickly out of the playoff race, while their division rival, the Cubs, tried their best to stay in it. The Nationals are up 2 spots from 25 to 23. They just beat the Yankees in a series. The Yankees, very good at baseball. Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, and they also just called up Dylan Cruz. So everything's looking up in the nation's capital. Washington is up 2 spots. Also up 2 spots, the Blue Jays. Have you seen what Vlad Guerrero Jr. has been doing? I know this has been a back-of-the-mind story for a very, very long time, but Vlad Guerrero Jr., since the All-Star break, is hitting 400, OPS of 1,300. It's ridiculous. He's back to form. I don't know where it was for the last couple years since 2021, but if he can stay like this, the Blue Jays might be able to be somewhere, although I still think they should have sold at the deadline. At 21, we have the Tigers. They've been hot in the last couple weeks. They continue to win games, 7-3 in their last 10. They're up 2 spots to 21. The Rangers, defending champions, Rangers, up 1 spot to spot 20. They've been winning more games than they've been losing. They're getting some guys back. It's too little too late at this point, though. Unfortunately, they're just about out of the playoff race. Something crazy could technically happen, but they're all but out of the race at this point. At 19, the Rays stand pat. This is a reloading season for them. They call up some young guys to mess with service time. They've been looking better. They've been preparing. They're ready. Next season, the Rays will be back in the playoffs. At 18, the Cardinals. The Cardinals were on a surge before the All-Star break. They made a couple trades, and their deadline acquisitions just have not worked out. They are falling and fading quickly. They're down a spot to number 18. The Giants also down a spot. They are trying desperately to stay in competition for that last NL wildcard spot. They unfortunately are just out of range of it. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to hold on long enough to get to that third wildcard spot. Excuse me. At number 16, the Seattle Mariners. The Seattle Mariners have, again, been struggling. 5 and 5 in their last 10. They're staying above 500. There's only 4.5 out of a last playoff spot, but it feels like their momentum is gone. They fired their manager, and it feels like they're just slowly going to run out of steam. The Cubs have been a very hot team in the last couple of weeks. Credit to a Taylor Swift candle, of all things, is what they're giving credit to. The Chicago Cubs are just 5 games out of a playoff spot. They're 7-3 in their last 10. They're on a 3-game winning streak. They're on a roll. They are a team that might be able to sneak in over the Mets or the Braves for that last wildcard spot in the National League. Then we have the Red Sox. The Red Sox are fading a little bit. They just got swept not swept, but they did lose a lot of games against the Toronto Blue Jays. They're almost back to 500, right where they're used to being, 4.5 games out of a playoffs, or 3.5 games out of a playoff spot. They're 1 spot out from the playoffs, but it doesn't seem like they're going to get there. They're starting to run out of gas. They went a little bit of a run, but they're running out of steam. Same thing with the Mets. The Mets are one spot out, 3 games out from the Braves at a playoff spot. They were in there very, very shortly, just a little bit. They were in there for in the playoffs, but the Braves came back, figured stuff out, and now they've been on a little bit of a run of their own. The Mets have just been just unable to keep up with them. At 12, we have those Braves, the Braves that are 7-3 in their last 10, the Braves that just have barely been able to keep ahead of the Mets, which is all they need to do really to secure this wild card berth. And now we're on to playoff teams. At 11, the Twins. The Twins come in kind of faltering a little bit behind the Royals and the Guardians. We talked about them earlier. They're still in the race though. 2-8 in their last 10 though isn't a good look. The Astros drop a spot to 10 from the 9 hole. The Astros at the top of their division. They continue to win games, pull even further ahead of the Seattle Mariners. Then we have the Royals. The Royals, who for a very, very short while overtook the division from the Guardians, a division that the Guardians had been holding on to very tightly this whole time. Unfortunately, the Royals drop a couple of games. They're now a game and a half back from the Guardians, although they are all but locked to make a playoff spot for the first time in forever. Then we have the Guardians, for the first time falling out of the top 5 since we started doing it. They drop 5 spots to number 8, still in the top 10. They still control their division. 76 wins. A lot of teams are right around there. Seems like you have to get to around 85 to make a playoff bid this year. At 7, we have the Padres. They started to cool down. They were one of the hottest teams, if not the hottest team in baseball after the All-Star break. They're cooling down a little bit, but they are in a really, really good spot. Basically a lock for the playoffs as well. The Brewers climb 2 spots to number 6 as they just continue to win games. They're not too flashy. They're not doing anything special. They're just winning games consistently. And the Diamondbacks, just like the Padres, one of the hottest teams, rise all the way into the top 5. They're showing why and how they made the World Series last year. I don't think anything should change. They're just going to continue to grow. They are the first change in the top 5 in forever. The Orioles also climb up a spot as the Guardians drop a whole bunch. They're still behind the Yankees in the division. The Yankees have a 1.5 game lead as they're at number 3. They did just lose a series to the Nats, which is why they dropped. The Phillies climb 2 spots, only 1 game behind the Dodgers for the best record in the league. That's why the Dodgers sit on the top of the throne. Shohei Ohtani started throwing again. I'm not ready for that. I don't think anybody is ready for Shohei Ohtani to throw the ball again, because what he's doing with the bat, I can't imagine if he just starts pitching like a Cy Young. It's like a Cy Young pitcher again. Very scary to think of. He's going to be very, very good for the Dodgers for a very long time. And the Dodgers, once again, sit on the top of our power rankings. Let me know what you think of where the MLB sits. We are just about done. I mean, September starts on Sunday. Last month of baseball. Anything can happen. Very excited to see how this all plays out. But thank you, everybody, so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me today. I hope everybody has a great weekend. You have been listening to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Enjoy a Labor Day weekend. Enjoy your day off on Monday. We will be live on Monday, though, so remember to tune in. I will see you then. Enjoy some college football. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I feel like it's gonna be a bad day.